My wife always had a habit of half-folding her laundry and leaving it perched on the edge of the bed, like a lazy cat too proud to actually curl up. So when I came home early from a trip and found a pair of men's boxer briefs draped neatly on top of the stack, boxers I didn't own, mind you, I figured either she had started buying gifts for imaginary friends or something far less charming was going on. Dark humor bloomed in my chest. Maybe we had a ghost now, one who liked Hanes. The kind of ghost that didn't pay rent but definitely left stains. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, staring at that absurd little scrap of fabric, feeling the first thread of my marriage fray quietly under the weight of something unspeakable. It had been a rough week already. I was supposed to be in Chicago for 3 days on business, but a client canceled last minute, so I caught an earlier flight home. No grand romantic gesture, no big surprise. I just wanted a night of normalcy, of easy breathing in my own bed. But when I swung open the door, the house felt off. Not empty exactly. More like abandoned in a hurry. Shoes were missing from the mat. A jacket that was usually slung lazily over the kitchen chair was gone. And then those boxers, clean, deliberate, offensive in their innocence, mocking me from their stupid little throne. I didn't rage. I didn't yell. I just looked around with a hunter's patience, like the animal that realizes it's already stepped into a trap and now must decide whether to chew off its own leg or stay very, very still. The house was too clean. Not companies coming clean. No, this was crime scene cleanup clean. Counters wiped down to the point they still smelled faintly of bleach. Trash emptied. Even the laundry was suspiciously folded, if you could call throwing men's underwear into the mix folding. I wandered through the rooms, noting the minute inconsistencies. The way the bathroom mirror had been hastily wiped, leaving jagged streaks. The rumpled sheets, tugged halfway off the bed, as if someone had tried to make it and given up. The unmistakable sweet, nauseating hint of unfamiliar cologne lingering in the air, like a bad memory you can't quite place. In the bathroom sink, her favorite gold hoop earrings lay tangled together, one bent slightly out of shape. I knew my wife. She would never mistreat her jewelry. Not unless she was in a rush. Not unless she had something or someone to hide. Still, I said nothing. I didn't even call her. She wasn't answering her phone anyway. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table, elbows resting on the cold, smooth wood, and stared at the grain of it until it blurred. Time stretched out long and thin, snapping somewhere in the back of my mind. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, my phone buzzed against the tabletop like a dying bee. It was her sister, Ava. Odd. She never called me. Not unless something was wrong. I picked up, and her voice came through the line, raw and panicked. You need to come to County General. It's Emily. She's in the ER. There it was. The inevitable crash after the slow burn wreckage. I drove to the hospital with the kind of cold focus most men reserve for pulling bullets out of their own flesh. No music. No rage. Just the low hum of tires on asphalt and the hollow awareness that my life was in the process of disintegrating quietly, almost politely. When I arrived, Ava was pacing in the waiting room, her blonde hair tied up in a messy knot, looking too much like Emily for my comfort. Her face twisted with relief when she saw me, and she stumbled through an explanation. Panic attack, brought in by a friend who had since mysteriously disappeared. I nodded, keeping my face as blank as fresh paper. Ava hugged me, clung, almost, and I caught the faintest whiff of a perfume I didn't recognize, something heavy and floral, different from the light citrusy scent Emily wore. Funny how you notice the little things when your world is busy coming apart. They let me into Emily's room after what felt like hours. She was asleep, and force snaking into her wrist, her mouth slack, her hair spread out on the pillow like a crime scene sketch. I didn't wake her. I just sat there, staring at the woman I no longer recognized, waiting for some kind of feeling, grief, anger, betrayal, to rise up and consume me. But nothing came. Only a deep, gnawing emptiness, like my body had hollowed itself out to make room for whatever hell was about to unfold. It wasn't long before I heard it. Muffled voices outside the door, raised in hushed urgency. Ava and someone else? I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes so they wouldn't notice I was awake. Their words leaked through the thin hospital walls like smoke. You can't tell her yet, Ava hissed. She's not strong enough. I know, a man's voice whispered back, my own voice, except it wasn't mine. It was laced with guilt, with fear. But what if someone else does? What if he finds out? Ava's voice cracked. He won't. He can't. Not now. Not like this. The puzzle pieces clicked together with the horrifying finality of a loaded chamber snapping shut. not just betrayal. Collusion. I opened my eyes, staring up at the harsh fluorescent lights, a strange smile creeping across my face. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was relief. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was just some bumbling husband, stumbling through a life he didn't realize was already dead. And that's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I was going to burn their little secret to the ground, slowly, methodically, and I would make sure Emily woke up to find herself standing in the ashes. And Ava? Sweet, desperate Ava? She was going to help me light the match. It didn't fall apart all at once. If anything, at first, it looked like things were getting better. Emily had this new energy about her, this glow that I hadn't seen in years. She started waking up early, going for runs before work, picking up yoga classes in the evening. She said she was finding herself, like she'd been misplaced somewhere in our living room and just now realized it. I was proud of her at first. I encouraged her, even bought her a fancy new yoga mat and a subscription to some meditation app she never used. We laughed about it. We made jokes about her becoming a Zen goddess, while I was still the same stubborn mule, stuck in my habits. And for a while, it felt good, like maybe after years of sameness, of predictable routines and easy silences, we were finally evolving together. But then the changes started getting sharper, cutting into our lives like little slivers you don't notice until they're too deep to pull out easily. She started working later and later, shrugging off dinner plans with a quick kiss and a distracted apology. Her phone was never out of reach. She used to leave it charging in the kitchen overnight. Now it came to bed with her, tucked under her pillow like a secret. I joked about it once, teasing her that she must be plotting a coup against me in her group chats, but the laugh she gave me didn't touch her eyes. She just said something about boundaries, about having her own life. It sounded reasonable, the kind of thing you read about in self-help articles written by people whose spouses are already sleeping in other beds. Then came the purchases. Not big enough to set off alarms individually, but in total, they felt wrong. Expensive perfume she never wore around me. High heels she said she needed for work events, though as far as I knew, her office still had a strict business casual dress code that barely tolerated loafers. Receipts crumpled up in the bottom of her purse for fancy restaurants I knew she hadn't gone to with me. I told myself she was treating herself, that maybe she was making new friends, that maybe after years of being a good, supportive wife, she was finally giving herself permission to be a little selfish. After all, hadn't I always said she deserved more? I clung to that excuse like a lifeline, even as the days got longer and the space between us grew thick and silent, filled with half-truths and missed connections. One night, I found a key card tucked between the seats of her car when I went to fill it up with gas. A sleek, black hotel keycard without any branding. When I asked her about it, she laughed, too quickly, too lightly, and said it must have been from her conference 2 months ago. I can't believe it's still in there, she said, shaking her head, brushing it off like lint. I believed her. I wanted to believe her so badly that I didn't even question why a woman who always traveled for work with her bossy little day planner and color-coded folders would leave a random keycard buried in the car for weeks. Love makes you stupid like that. Or maybe it just makes you complicit. Her social media, once filled with goofy selfies of us, with pictures of half-burnt pancakes we made on lazy Sundays, slowly shifted into something else. Fitness updates. Inspirational quotes. Artsy shots of sunsets and wine glasses without anyone in the frame. Then one day, her Instagram went private. No warning, no explanation. Just locked away like a diary she didn't want me to read anymore. I asked her about it, half joking. She shrugged and said she just wanted a little privacy while she figured herself out. She smiled when she said it, that same bright, practiced smile she used on strangers and coworkers, not the soft, familiar one she used to save for me. It didn't feel like a wall going up all at once. It felt like one brick being laid at a time, slow enough that I didn't notice how far away she was standing until the fortress was already built. Even when we were together, she was somewhere else. We'd be sitting on the couch, the TV droning on with some forgettable crime show, and I'd glance over and find her staring at her phone, smiling at something she wasn't willing to share. Or worse, she'd catch me looking and immediately swipe the screen away, flashing that same brittle, defensive grin. I started feeling like a guest in my own home, someone tolerated out of politeness rather than loved. But still, I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself that people change, that marriage means riding out the rough patches, that trust was a choice you make every single day, even when you're not sure if it's being returned. So I chose it. I chose to trust her. I kissed her goodnight even when she turned away. I made her coffee in the morning even when she barely touched it. I kept believing in us because the alternative, the idea that she had already left me in every way that mattered, but hadn't bothered to pack her things, was too terrible to accept. Not yet. Not until the truth finally decided to drag itself out into the light, sharp and bloody and undeniable. It happened on a Tuesday night, one of those dull midweek evenings when nothing special is supposed to happen and everything should feel safe and boring. Emily had kissed me on the cheek that morning, packed her gym bag, and told me she had a late class followed by dinner with the girls. I nodded, smiled, wished her fun without thinking twice, because that's what you do when you're desperately trying to keep believing. I stayed late at work myself, intentionally dragging my feet, not because I was suspicious, no, not yet, but because going home to an empty house had started to feel like volunteering for punishment. It was almost 10:30 when I finally pulled into the driveway, and her car wasn't there, which didn't immediately set off alarms. I convinced myself she was still out laughing over wine and salads with people who understood her journey. I didn't even take off my coat when I stepped inside. I just dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and collapsed into the chair by the window, scrolling numbly through my phone, telling myself to stop thinking so damn much. The GPS app was still open from my earlier drive, the route home displayed in cold, uncaring blue lines. Out of habit, I hit the refresh button, expecting nothing. Instead, a small banner popped up under Family Devices. Emily's phone, still live, still broadcasting. Curiosity, just a pinch of it, not even enough to call it doubt yet, made me click. Her last known location blinked onto the screen, sending a thin wire of electricity up my spine. A dive bar. Not a yoga studio. Not a fancy restaurant with the girls. A grimy little dive bar downtown, the kind of place where the jukebox is always broken and the floors smell like stale beer and broken promises. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, feeling my heartbeat slow, not speed up, like my body already understood what my mind refused to process. I didn't rush. I didn't grab my coat and storm out like some cliché soap opera character. I just sat there, watching the little blinking dot, committing every detail to memory. Then, with a slow, deliberate precision, I pulled out my laptop and opened her social media accounts, one she hadn't realized I still had access to through an old device she never thought to unlink. Her Instagram was quiet, no new posts. But her close friends' stories told another tale, a blurry photo of a booth at the bar, a laughing girl's face half cropped out, and across from her, unmistakably, a man's broad shoulders and arm draped lazily across the back of the booth. A simple caption, "Best night ever, Red Heart." My chest tightened, not with rage, not even with heartbreak, but with a cold, detached clarity. I zoomed in. Emily's distinctive charm bracelet dangled from the wrist of the laughing girl. She wasn't hiding it. She wasn't even pretending. She had just decided I was too stupid or too blind to notice. I closed the laptop slowly, carefully, as if sealing away a bomb. I didn't pace. I didn't shout. I didn't even text her. I just sat there, motionless, staring into the dark reflection of the window, feeling the last fragile thread of our life together finally snap. It didn't make a noise. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than any explosion. I thought of all the nights I stayed late to give her space, all the weekends I planned getaways she canceled last minute, all the quiet sacrifices she had taken like offerings she never intended to reciprocate. It wasn't just the betrayal of the body. It was the betrayal of time, of trust, of 1,000 tiny moments where she could have chosen me and chose herself instead. No, chose someone else instead. I stood up then, but not in a rush. In a slow, deliberate way, like a man checking the perimeter of his own home after realizing the doors had been unlocked for months. My mind wasn't racing. It was sharpening, honing itself into a weapon she wouldn't even see coming. I walked through the house, every room now a crime scene. The kitchen with its untouched stack of mail where my birthday card from her still lay unopened. The living room where the picture frames hung slightly askew, as if even the walls had gotten tired of pretending. The bedroom where her perfume still lingered in the air like the ghost of someone I didn't know anymore. I wasn't mourning. Mourning implies loss, and what I had lost wasn't worth grieving. I was planning. Already, my brain was moving like clockwork, assembling pieces she didn't even know were exposed. She thought she was in control. She thought she had written the script. What she didn't know was that by betraying me so brazenly, so stupidly, she had handed me the pen. I was going to rewrite the ending. Not with anger, not with violence, but with precision, with patience, with absolute, unrelenting coldness. When Emily finally stumbled through the door an hour later, cheeks flushed from cheap alcohol and poorly hidden guilt, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping a beer like nothing had changed. I smiled at her. A real smile. Not the desperate, hopeful ones I used to wear like armor. No, this one was different. This was the smile of a man who knew exactly what was coming. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt unstoppable. The morning after her drunken return, I played my role with perfect precision. I brewed her coffee just the way she liked it. Half cream, no sugar, set it on the counter, and kissed her forehead as she winced through her hangover. I asked about her night casually, just a sprinkle of curiosity, and listened as she wove a tapestry of lies so clumsy and threadbare it was almost insulting. "Just a late dinner with the girls," she said, not meeting my eyes. We lost track of time. I nodded, smiling, storing her words neatly in my mental ledger. I knew better than to argue. Arguments give the guilty a chance to sharpen their lies. No, I wanted her relaxed, predictable, thinking she was still in control. Over the next week, I became a ghost inside my own home, moving silently, watching everything. I started small, checking our shared bank account late at night when she thought I was asleep. Hidden among the usual groceries and gas station stops were small, repeated charges to a little cafe on the other side of town, a place I knew she had no reason to visit. I didn't ask her about it. Instead, I made a note to swing by after work. The next afternoon, under the guise of running errands, I stopped by the cafe. It was a dim, cozy place with a dozen tables and a barista who clearly knew the regulars by name. I ordered a coffee I didn't want and sat by the window, scanning the crowd. No Emily. No sign of her mystery companion. But what I did notice was the little alleyway to the side, leading to a budget motel tucked just out of view from the main street. Cute. I left without finishing my drink. Back home, I started planting traps. Harmless, curious questions framed in perfect innocence. "Hey, you mentioned you had another dinner with the girls this Friday, right?" I asked casually over dinner. She blinked, just for a split second, before nodding and spinning a story about a new tapas place downtown. I let it slide, already knowing she had no reservation under her name, or any of her friends' names, because I had checked. I called the restaurant myself, pretending to book a table for two, and asked if a reservation had already been made under her name. "No, sir," the hostess chirped. "Would you like to make one?" I smiled, said no thanks, and hung up. Another tally mark against her. The next move was more surgical. I created a dummy email account, nothing flashy, just a boring, generic name, and used it to create a fake Instagram profile. No posts, no pictures, just a profile that looked like a real, bland person. I followed a few of Emily's friends and waited. Sure enough, after a day, I saw it. Her best friend, Lisa, posted a story, an innocent little boomerang of drinks clinking together, tagging the location as a downtown rooftop bar. Curious, since Emily had claimed she was working late that night. I messaged Lisa from the fake account, pretending to be an old classmate who recognized her. A few back and forths later, she let slip that she was celebrating Emily's new relationship. Said she was so happy Emily had finally found someone who gets her. I almost laughed out loud at how easy it was. They weren't even trying to hide it from people they thought didn't matter. The real checkmate move, though, came when I decided to follow not Emily, but Lisa. Every Thursday night, Lisa posted a predictable pattern of events, outfits, bar selfies, endless streams of their little adventures. So that Thursday, I parked 2 streets over from Lisa's apartment and watched. Sure enough, a little after 7, Emily pulled up in a car I didn't recognize, a sleek black sedan I knew damn well wasn't hers or any of her friends. She jumped out, laughing, hair down, makeup heavier than usual. She looked radiant. She looked free. She didn't look married. I took a few photos from a distance. Nothing graphic, nothing intrusive. Just enough to confirm what I already knew. My wife was living a life that didn't include me anymore. At home, I stayed quiet, cordial. I even initiated a movie night, pretending to fall asleep halfway through so she could slip away to text whoever was making her glow in ways I hadn't seen in months. And she did. I watched through half-lidded eyes as she turned her phone screen away from me, typing furiously, biting her lip to hide her smile. Every movement was another confession, silent and damning. I didn't need her to admit anything. I didn't need to catch her in the act. I already had everything I needed. She thought she was dancing on a stage she built with her own lies, but what she didn't know was that the audience had changed. The lights were still on, the music still played, but the man she thought she was fooling was already in the wings, pulling the ropes, ready to drop the curtain. Soon. Not yet. Timing was everything. And when the final act came, she wouldn't even see it coming until the walls collapsed around her. It was her idea to celebrate, ironically enough. She suggested we have a date night to reconnect, some sudden burst of guilt or strategic move. I couldn't tell which. I agreed immediately, my face a mask of eager relief, while inside my chest a storm churned so cold it could have frozen the sun. I picked the place carefully, a little Italian restaurant tucked away on the edge of downtown, cozy, dimly lit, the kind of place where secrets felt too big for the small, fragile tables. She wore that blue dress I used to love, the one she hadn't touched in over a year, and when she walked in, smiling like a politician up for re-election, I felt a strange detachment settle over me, calm and clear. We ordered wine, made idle chatter about work, about the weather, about nothing that mattered. I smiled, nodded, and let her fill the silence with words that meant less with every breath she took. When the moment was right, when our entrees had just arrived and she was too distracted cutting her salmon into perfect little pieces, I slid my phone across the table toward her. On the screen was a photo. Her, half-straddling a man outside the motel near the cafe, his hands tangled in her hair, her lips devouring his like she had forgotten anyone else even existed. She froze, the knife slipping from her fingers and clattering onto the plate with a noise that cracked through the ambient hum of the restaurant. For a moment, she just stared, mouth slightly open, breathing shallow. Then, like clockwork, the performance began. "It's not what you think," she whispered, voice trembling but still trying to summon some authority. I tilted my head, studying her like a scientist watching a rat run through a maze. "We were just talking," she tried again, panic starting to seep into the edges of her composure. I said nothing, only leaning back in my chair, letting the silence squeeze her like a vice. "It was a mistake," she blurted, her hands fluttering uselessly in front of her, as if she could erase the image from the screen by waving it away. Her eyes darted around the restaurant, realizing for the first time that the world hadn't stopped for her shame, that strangers were still eating and laughing and living while her perfect little facade crumbled. "You never paid attention to me," she hissed, voice low and venomous now, reaching for the oldest weapon in the book, trying to carve her guilt into my chest instead. I smiled then, just a small, almost pitying curve of my lips, and in that smile she must have seen the truth, that nothing she said mattered anymore. That she had already lost. Personal growth, right? I said softly, tilting my head just enough to make her flinch. Boundaries. Space. Was this part of the journey you were so excited about? Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked small suddenly, absurdly so, as if the very chair she sat in no longer fit her properly. She straightened her spine, tried to gather what little dignity she had left, and sneered, "You think you're better than me?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the question hang there, heavy and ugly between us, before leaning forward, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "I didn't have to betray the person who loved me just to feel special," I said. No anger, no raised voice, just the scalpel precision of truth sliding between her ribs. The bravado cracked. Her hand shook as she reached for her wine glass, missing it the first time. I watched her scramble, her polished, perfect exterior collapsing piece by piece as she realized this wasn't going to end with forgiveness, with shouting, with a grand dramatic reconciliation. No, this was something colder. Something final. I made a mistake. She tried one last time, voice wobbling, desperation leaking through the seams. I picked up my fork, stabbing a piece of salmon casually, and said, almost absently, "No, Emily. You made a choice." Her face crumpled at that, a fleeting, broken thing she quickly tried to patch up with a brittle laugh. "You're being dramatic," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew how hollow they sounded. She was cornered now, an actress who had forgotten her lines halfway through the play, stuck improvising badly in front of an audience that had already turned against her. She glanced around again, searching for an escape route that wasn't there, realizing every eye in the room could turn on her at any moment if she cracked too loud, cried too hard, begged too obviously. Good. Let her stew in that. Let her feel the walls inch closer. I wiped my mouth with my napkin slowly, methodically, and then set it down beside my plate. My movement so calm it must have unnerved her more than any shout would have. I didn't leave. Not yet. I sat there, sipping my wine, savoring the taste of it, while across the table, Emily unraveled by the second, trapped in a moment she could no longer control. I wasn't going to give her the mercy of an ending. Not yet. Not until she understood exactly what it felt like to have no power, no escape, no hope of redemption. The silence between us grew thicker, heavier, a noose tightening inch by inch, and I watched her suffocate on it. Quietly. Perfectly. It didn't take long for the collapse to begin in earnest, like watching a building detonate from the inside, slow at first, then crumbling faster with every passing second. Emily leaned across the table, her eyes wild, voice low and trembling as she tried to claw her way back into the narrative she thought she could still control. "You don't understand," she whispered, frantic. "You weren't there. You didn't see how lonely it got, how small you made me feel." I said nothing, just let my gaze rest on her like the weight of a tombstone. She took my silence as permission, as weakness, and pushed harder, her words sharpening into blades. "You smothered me," she spat, nostrils flaring. "You always had to know everything, had to control everything, and now you act like you're some victim?" She laughed, harsh and brittle, the sound bouncing off the walls of the restaurant like breaking glass. Still, I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't offer her even the dignity of a rebuttal. She shifted tactics, sensing the ground slipping beneath her feet. "You were boring," she hissed, leaning closer so no one else could hear her poison. "Predictable. Safe. I needed more than just this." She waved her hand at me, disgusted, as if the man she married was now some worn-out relic she was ashamed to be seen with. I picked up my glass, took a long, unhurried sip of wine, and set it back down with a soft click, my eyes never leaving hers. "You're confusing loyalty with boredom," I said, my voice so low, and even it felt more like a diagnosis than an insult, and I watched her recoil like I'd slapped her. Her mouth opened, reaching for another weapon, another excuse. But now the fear was starting to bleed through, staining her anger with desperation. "You were supposed to fight for me," she gasped, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "You were supposed to make me feel alive, not trapped." She bit the last word off like it hurt to say it, and maybe it did. Maybe some part of her was starting to realize that no matter how many excuses she vomited out onto the table, the reality wouldn't change. She cheated. She lied. And now she was the one trapped, caught in a net she had woven herself. I needed more, she cried, a little louder now, drawing a few curious glances from nearby tables. I leaned in slightly, just enough to make her instinctively flinch back. "You needed someone too stupid to see you," I murmured, the words landing like tiny, precise cuts, and I saw the moment they registered, saw the way her shoulders sagged just for a second before pride forced them back up. She bared her teeth in something too twisted to be called a smile. "If you were a real man," she sneered, venom dripping from every syllable, "this wouldn't have happened. It was supposed to be the killing blow, the final twist of the knife." But I just nodded slowly, thoughtfully, and then said, "If you were a real woman, it wouldn't have mattered." The way her face crumpled for a split second before she covered it with fresh rage was almost tragic. Almost. She slammed her hands down on the table, the silverware jumping with the force of it, and snarled, "You think you're better than me? You think sitting there silent makes you strong? You're a coward. You're nothing." I smiled then, a slow, cruel thing that made her physically draw back in her chair. "I'm nothing," I agreed softly, "which makes you even less for losing me." She opened her mouth again, a scream, a sob, a curse, I couldn't tell which, but no sound came out. Just the slow, choked realization that no matter what she said now, it didn't matter. She couldn't hurt me. She couldn't reach me. I was already gone, and she was left swinging her fists in an empty ring. The waitress approached nervously, sensing the tension crackling between us, but I waved her off with a polite smile, never breaking eye contact with Emily. Let her stew in it. Let her drown in it. She wiped at her eyes angrily, smearing her mascara, trying to salvage some shred of control, some last piece of the woman she used to be. But it was useless. Every accusation, every insult, every desperate, clawing attempt to reclaim the upper hand only drove her deeper into the quicksand. And I watched, silent and still, the perfect audience to her self-destruction. She thought she was strong enough to survive the fallout, that she could twist the story, rewrite the ending. She thought wrong. Now, every second she spent trying to tear me down only built me higher, steadier, more untouchable. And for the first time, she knew it. She saw it in the way I looked at her, not with love, not with hate, but with the cold indifference reserved for strangers you'll never think about again. She was spiraling. She was sinking. And I was already walking away in my mind, leaving her behind to choke on the wreckage of everything she thought she controlled. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The silence was enough to finish what her betrayal had started. I didn't leave the restaurant in a storm. I didn't slam my chair back or cause a scene. I finished my wine, placed a few crisp bills on the table, and walked out into the cool night like a man stepping off a battlefield already won. She stayed frozen behind me, still trying to summon the words that could stop the inevitable, not realizing the war had ended the moment she chose someone else. Revenge wasn't going to be loud. It wasn't going to be messy. It was going to be clean, clinical, methodical, the way a surgeon removes a tumor. The next morning, before the sun was even fully up, I started moving. First, I gathered every piece of evidence. I spent hours compiling messages, emails, receipts, screenshots, every line neatly stacked and categorized in labeled folders, digital and physical, like building an airtight case. Her social media posts, her text logs, her sudden late-night charges at motels, it was all there. I backed everything up twice, one copy locked away in a private cloud, the other on a flash drive I kept in my pocket like a loaded weapon. She wouldn't see it coming until it was too late to run. Next, I locked down the finances. I had already moved most of my paycheck into a private account weeks earlier when the cracks first appeared, but now I went further. I withdrew half the savings legally allowed, transferred the car title solely into my name, since I had paid for it in full, and canceled every shared credit card we had. Quietly, efficiently, without a single warning email to tip her off. She wouldn't notice until her next swipe got declined. Utilities were switched out of my name. Subscriptions, insurance, gym memberships, everything tied to my money or my identity vanished from her reach like smoke. Meanwhile, I booked consultations with 3 of the top divorce attorneys in our city, not because I needed them all, but because in doing so, I ensured she couldn't hire them later due to conflict of interest. I filed for divorce that same afternoon, citing adultery, attaching all the evidence in a neat, brutal little package. The court would eat it up. I requested temporary exclusive use of the house pending proceedings. She loved that house. She had spent years decorating every corner, curating every piece of furniture to match some carefully crafted Instagram-ready life. Now it was going to be mine, and she would be the one posting about starting over in some dingy apartment she could barely afford. While the legal wheels started turning, I made sure her public life unraveled just as neatly. I sent a brief, emotionless email to her parents, attaching a sanitized version of the evidence, just enough to make them understand without turning it into a circus. They were traditional people. Loyalty mattered to them. She had always been their golden child. Now they would see her with new eyes. I didn't rant. I didn't beg for their support. I simply presented the truth and let their disappointment do the rest. Then I moved on to her professional world. A simple, anonymous tip to her HR department about potential conduct issues related to her relationship with a client, accompanied by some well-chosen screenshots, was enough to trigger an internal review. Her job had strict policies about personal entanglements with clients. She would have to explain herself, and whether they fired her or simply sidelined her, the damage would be done. Opportunities would dry up. Promotions would evaporate. She'd have to sit at her desk every day knowing her career was bleeding out in front of her, and she couldn't even blame me for it without exposing herself further. I timed everything perfectly. The day after she thought we might talk and work through it, her bank cards would stop working. She would come home to find the locks changed, a legal letter tucked into her mailbox explaining the new reality she would have to accept. Her email would ping with meeting requests from HR. Her phone would light up with missed calls from confused friends and furious family members. I wouldn't block her. No, I wanted her to be able to see everything fall apart. I wanted her to reach out, to try to call, to beg or scream or blame, and realize every message went unanswered. Her voice, her anger, her tears, they didn't matter anymore. She was shouting into a void, and the void didn't care. Every detail, every move, every blow had been planned not in anger, but in pure, cold calculation. This wasn't revenge fueled by hate. This was justice rendered by a man who had given everything and watched it trampled underfoot. She thought she had time to fix it, to manipulate, to cry her way back into safety. But time had already run out. She just didn't know it yet. Not until the first domino fell, and by then, she'd realized she wasn't losing me. She had already lost herself. The night of her fall wasn't some spontaneous explosion. It was a slow, deliberate crumbling orchestrated down to the second. Emily had insisted we attend her friend Jenna's engagement party together, probably thinking some public display of unity would patch over the fractures she could feel deepening every day. I agreed, of course, because nothing would be sweeter than watching her entire world collapse while she still wore her best smile. She spent the afternoon curling her hair, choosing jewelry, perfecting her makeup to project the flawless image she clung to like a drowning woman clutching at driftwood. She looked beautiful when she stepped into the room that night, beautiful, polished, immaculate, and completely doomed. The venue was packed, 100 faces we both knew, friends, co-workers, family acquaintances, all gathered in a glittering hall under soft golden lights. As we entered, she squeezed my hand, probably trying to assure herself that the nightmare was over, that she still had me. I squeezed back once, lightly, almost kindly, and then let her walk a few steps ahead, just far enough for her to feel alone without knowing why. The first cracks showed at the greeting line. Jenna's fiancé, a good man who had seen more than Emily realized, stiffened when he hugged her. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Jenna herself gave me a long, knowing look before pulling me into a hug that lasted just a second too long, just public enough to be noticed. Emily's laugh was a little too loud, her smile a little too brittle as we moved through the crowd, but she clung to the script. She had no idea the entire room had already read the final act. The evidence I had quietly released 2 days before had done its work perfectly, just enough to be undeniable, just enough to ensure everyone here knew who she really was without a single word needing to be spoken. Screenshots, timestamps, locations, cold facts. No embellishments. Her parents were there too, standing by the bar with tight mouths and colder eyes, refusing to meet her gaze. When she tried to approach them, her mother turned away sharply, as if the sight of her own daughter physically hurt. Her father simply shook his head once, the final verdict passed down without a word. Emily faltered mid-step, confusion flashing across her features, before she pasted on another too wide smile and pretended she hadn't noticed. She tried to lose herself in small talk, clinking glasses, laughing too hard at jokes, leaning into old friends who now subtly leaned away. Each rejection was small, almost imperceptible, but they stacked up like stones around her neck. Her voice grew shriller as she talked faster, desperate to fill the space that used to be hers, not realizing it was already gone. When Lisa, her supposed best friend, arrived and beelined straight for me instead of her, the real panic set in. Lisa hugged me warmly, shot Emily a glance that could have frozen lava, and then spent the next 10 minutes at my side, ignoring every feeble attempt Emily made to insert herself into the conversation. The laughter died around her like a dying engine. She tried to joke about it, to make some snide comment about everyone being so serious tonight, but the words fell flat, brittle and pathetic. I watched her skim the room, watched her hunt for a friendly face and find none. Even her lover, the man she had risked everything for, wasn't there, because the night before, I had made sure he received a copy of the evidence as well. One look at the cold, clinical timeline of her deceptions, the way she had spun the same lies for him that she had spun for me, and he dropped her like a stone. No texts, no calls, no explanations, just silence. The very thing she had once weaponized against me now turned inward like a blade. She kept drinking, thinking maybe liquid courage would fill the void, but it only made the cracks more obvious. Her smile twitched at the edges. Her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. Her laugh turned into sharp, barking sounds that made nearby conversations falter into awkward silences. Finally, someone asked her, a little too loudly, a little too cruelly, "So, Em, are you and Mark still pretending everything's fine? Or?" The room fell quiet. Not completely silent, but quiet enough that the tension buzzed under the music like an exposed wire. Emily opened her mouth, some weak, can lie ready on her tongue, but when her eyes darted to me, calm, composed, standing still with a drink in my hand and nothing but cold indifference in my gaze, she broke. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Her face crumpled for just a moment, the mask slipping far enough that everyone saw the panic, the shame, the wild, desperate need for someone, anyone, to throw her a lifeline. No one moved. No one saved her. She stumbled through the rest of the night like a ghost, clinging to the edges of conversations where she was no longer welcome, smiling into the void. And I stayed. I stayed in her line of sight the entire time, never shouting, never accusing, never even speaking a word to her. Just watching. Just letting her know that I saw her, truly saw her now, and that no amount of tears or tantrums could change what she had done. She broke herself. I only made sure there was an audience. And in the end, it wasn't the exposure that destroyed her. It was the silence. The way I stood there, unmoved, unbothered, while the world she built on lies collapsed into rubble around her feet. The second the party staggered toward its awkward close and people started slipping on their coats, she cornered me near the bar, her face a wreck of smeared makeup and barely contained hysteria, grabbing my wrist like she could physically pull me back into the prison she'd built. But the second her fingers wrapped around me, I turned, slowly, deliberately, and said just loud enough for the whole cluster of lingering guests, including her parents, my brother, and a handful of her now former friends, to hear, "Get your hands off me. Emily, you've lost that right." The words snapped through the air like a whip, and the ripple of gasps that followed fed the fire burning behind her wide, panicked eyes. She tried to smile, that fake little twitch of lips she used when she thought she could still spin the story, but it twisted into a snarl halfway through. "This isn't fair," she cried, her voice cracking like dry wood. "You're making me look crazy." I laughed thin, sharp and humorless, and the sound cut through the murmurs like a blade. "No, Emily," I said, my voice steady and cruel, "you did that all by yourself the moment you decided loyalty was boring." Her father took a step closer, looking like he wanted to drag her away by the arm, but he stopped when she spun to face the room, arms thrown wide, voice rising higher, shriller. "You all act so perfect," she screamed, "like you never made mistakes. Like you're better than me." People were backing up now, giving her a wide berth like she was something dangerous, contagious, a spectacle no one wanted to be too close to but couldn't look away from. She turned on me again, venom dripping from every word. "You weren't enough. You were never enough. You made me feel invisible." Her mother flinched at the words, turning her face away in shame, while my brother folded his arms, his jaw tight, staring at her like he didn't recognize the creature she had become. I leaned forward slightly, just enough that she instinctively recoiled, and said, "You weren't invisible, Emily. You were seen. You were loved. You were given everything. You just weren't satisfied unless you were being worshipped by everyone at once." The silence after that was brutal, oppressive, as the weight of the truth hung in the air, and she did exactly what I knew she would: lash out harder, uglier, more desperate. "At least he made me feel alive," she shrieked, and the collective inhale from the room was almost theatrical. Her lover, a slimy little stain of a man who had been lurking at the edge of the party pretending not to exist, had the misfortune of hearing his name without warning. Heads turned. Phones lifted. Someone started filming, the tiny red light blinking at the corner of my vision. "Perfect." "Yeah," I said, louder now, my voice rising not in anger but in clarity, cutting through her noise like a hammer through glass. "Funny, because he dumped you the second he realized you weren't worth losing his own family for." A fresh wave of gasps. She opened her mouth, trying to summon some cutting retort, some clever line to twist the knife back into me, but all that came out was a strangled sob. She stumbled a step back, reaching blindly for support, but no one moved to catch her. Her friends, once her loyal court, were statues now, faces carved from stone, judgment heavy in their stares. Her mother's hand was pressed tightly over her mouth, her father's arms crossed like concrete barriers, and the man she had risked everything for was nowhere to be seen. Having slithered out the back like the coward he was the second the spotlight turned ugly. She tried again, voice ragged. "I gave you everything." And I stepped closer, not enough to touch her, just enough that she couldn't ignore the full force of my presence. "No," I said, slowly, methodically, so every single person watching could hear every syllable. "You gave me nothing but broken promises and stolen time. And now you're standing in the ruins you built with your own hands, wondering why no one wants to save you." Her knees buckled slightly, and someone, not me, reached out instinctively, but she slapped their hand away, pride still stubborn enough to refuse even mercy. She spun one last time, eyes darting desperately around the crowd, searching for one face, one voice, one hand willing to pull her back, and found only a wall of silence and disgust. I stood there, unmoving, a living monument to her consequences, and as she realized that, really realized it, the last piece of her facade crumbled. She broke into sobs, loud, ugly, racking her whole body, sinking down to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. And still, I didn't move. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer anger. I simply watched, hands in my pockets, as the woman who once demanded the world kneel for her now knelt alone on a sticky floor in a cheap rented hall, weeping in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress. And when I finally turned and walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of her sobs chasing me into the night was all the closure I would ever need. It didn't take long for her to lose everything. The job was the first to go, a clean, clinical termination hidden behind corporate phrases like loss of confidence, and internal policy violations. They didn't fire her because they cared about morality. They fired her because a woman who couldn't keep her personal life out of a scandal couldn't be trusted with clients who had reputations to protect. Word got around quickly after that. Friends who once posted selfies with her, tagging her in endless inside jokes, now blocked her quietly, almost politely, like she was some embarrassing mistake they didn't want in their digital footprint. She stopped showing up at the gym where she used to flaunt her new lifestyle. Too many eyes following her. Too many whispered conversations just loud enough for her to hear the words cheater and pathetic. Her parents stopped answering her calls. The same mother who used to brag about her at every holiday dinner now spoke about her in past tense, as if she had died, and maybe in a way, she had. Her father returned a box of her childhood things to her new address without a note, without a call. No forgiveness, just finality. She moved to a smaller town a few counties over, renting a dingy little apartment above a laundromat, working some forgettable job in a shop where nobody knew her name and nobody asked questions. Her affair partner had vanished the minute the comfort and secrecy disappeared, ghosting her so thoroughly that even the echo of his promises was gone. And then, of course, the messages started. The first one was a simple, "I'm sorry," sent at 2 in the morning, like all weak apologies are. I didn't reply. The second was longer, a rambling confession of how she lost herself and how she still believed we had something worth saving. I deleted it without even opening it fully. But she wasn't ready to give up her final humiliation. One night, weeks after the divorce papers had been signed and stamped, after the accounts had been separated and the dust had well and truly settled, I heard a knock at the door. I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole. There she was, standing in the rain, hair matted, makeup running, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. For a second, she didn't even say anything. She just stood there, hands trembling at her sides, waiting for some miracle that wasn't coming. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw, broken, the voice of someone who had nothing left to bargain with. "Please," she said, "please just hear me out. I made a mistake. I lost everything. I still love you." I looked at her for a long moment, letting her soak in the silence, letting her realize that the man she betrayed didn't live here anymore, just the man who survived her. I could have yelled. I could have thrown her words back at her, carved her apart with all the hurt she had sown into me. But I didn't. I simply gave her a small, tired smile, the kind you give a stranger asking for directions you have no intention of offering, and said, "Strange. I don't even remember your name anymore." She broke completely then, a choked sob bursting from her lips as she staggered back a step, clutching at the air like she could still pull me back if she just tried hard enough. But I shut the door quietly, not slamming it, not making a scene, just closing that chapter with the soft, definitive click it deserved. I watched through the peephole as she stood there for a few minutes longer, shoulders heaving, before finally giving up and disappearing into the night, swallowed by the very darkness she had chosen over me. And that was it. No more pleas. No more messages. Just silence, the only fitting memorial for what we once had. Thank you for listening to my story. This one was a journey. I'm curious, where are you tuning in from? Did you enjoy it? I'd love to know.